Now we can work on the cuffs. They're worked in two different ways. The wrist cuff is just closed on the shorter edges. So the shorter edges come together and you sew those together, and then we're going to fold it in half. So it's going to be put in as one. So that is my wrist cuff. And then you've got the ankle cuff where we're going to work the other way around. We're going to fold over so the long edges lie on top of each other, and then we're going to sew along just the one side, and of course the right sides have to be facing each other. And here we have got the two ankle cuffs, and I can sew these together now. For the wrist cuff, you just go straight down. I'm just using a standard stitch. I pull it a tiny little bit so that I've got enough stretch in there. Not very much though, the machine does that automatically as well. See, just a little bit like that and it'll be perfect. And then when you do the side of the ankle cuff, you actually want to come in at the lower end by about 2 millimeters, because otherwise you'll end up with a little bit of a nose that sort of tips out to the side. So you want to make sure that you do that. It looks a little bit wrong, but once it's ironed, it'll look perfect. So on the wrist cuffs, I'm just going to iron the seam apart now. And then I'm going to cut the seam back because it's quite thick, that rib stuff, and I don't want it to be in the way. So I'm going to just reduce my seam allowance a little bit here. And then I fold my two rough edges so they're sitting on top of each other, and that concludes my cuff, and it's then ready to be put in. There we go. I'm going to just give that another little press like that. Excellent. And now I'm going to move on to my ankle cuff and cut that thread off and turn it. And I'm going to cut this back a little bit as well. Now I'm going to turn it, and it's going to look perfectly straight. You know, it doesn't come in, it's going to look perfectly straight because I came in a little bit when I was sewing down the side. So that's just a little tip for you. So there we are. Now I'm going to put the wrist cuff into the romper. So turn the romper inside out and then put the seams on top of each other. Just one pin in there, vertical to the seam, stretch it to fit like that. It's really simple. No need to mark anything of that because it's such a small space. And again, I'm going to put a vertical pin in that. And then I can put another vertical pin on the half of what I've just stretched, and then I do the same on the other side. And that's really all I have to do, and then I can go and stitch this in. That's my one side done. Brilliant. And I do the other side as well. Again, we're always going to sew from the inside, very important. You never try it the other way, and I'm using a bob standard stitch, not triple stitch, just go all the way around, because as you're stretching it anyway, there's no need to use that stitch. It won't break, because if you're doing what I'm doing here and that's really stretch it, you don't need to do that. And I do foot width here for my seam allowance. I could have done 1 centimeter, but it doesn't really matter too much, and I think foot width sometimes is just easier. And there my seam allowance wanted to slip over. There we go. Again, secure your stitching. Voila. Now I've overlocked that as well. You first want to press it as it is so that we can, you know, kind of like steam it back in. And then you also want to press it from the inside like that. I'll just pull it out and give it a really good steam. And then I'm going to press it again from the outside as well. Turn my little sleeve inside out to make sure that everything is beautiful. And it is. When you're steaming, You don't exactly put your iron on first. What you do is like you let the iron hover over it, and then you press your steam button so it really steams it up, and then you can kind of move things in a bit and shrink it almost back, and then you can put your iron on, and this works really nice. You can see it here, gives you a really lovely cuff. Now we're going to do the ankle cuff, where you're going to learn a super new technique. So the finished end needs to sit right next to your facing. That's the front facing, right? So finished end right on the edge of the front facing. The front facing will then wrap around it. As you can see, my phone was ready because I was taking pictures as well, so that you get better pictures in the written instructions. And then the open edge goes to the other end, which is the back leg of the romper. And now I'm just going to stretch it to fit. And there's going to be like a little bit of a gather on that leg so that it's a really nice, comfortable romper. Even if you're using like a two-way stretch, my jersey only stretches widthways. It doesn't really stretch lengthways. It's like a two-way stretch. So I want to make sure that I've got a nice, comfortable pattern for whatever kind of jersey you use. So we're stretching it a little bit more here. There you go. And we're going to sew this in first. You don't necessarily even need to pin it all in first. So onto your sewing machine. And I'm just going to stretch it along. I'm going to grab the back ends and put them on top of each other and just stretch it as I go. There's no real need to pin this. Some people might wanna, and you can. I don't. It depends on your experience. I think sometimes a pin is quite helpful, but you know, if you're sewing for a long time, you don't really need to do it. And then I can remove my pins, and my next step is to wrap around that facing now. So that needs to be sitting round that cuff. And now I'm going to close that little bit here as well. Move over my seam allowance so I catch that as well. And move it over. Brilliant. I can then overlock it all, or like you just said, you could overlock it first. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to cut off my corner a bit so it's nice and thin in there, so when I put my poppers in, nothing will be in the way. And I'm also going to steam this back in now that I've stretched it and I've overlocked it. I'm going to take this and make sure that it lies nice and flat before I turn it. It's brilliant. So now pull that out and you get a really fantastic edge. Isn't that lovely? I mean, it's really nice when you know the techniques and it comes together and it doesn't look homemade. You know, I think that's what everybody aims for anyway. Now there's one more thing before I can finish off the inner back leg, and that is the front facing, which isn't secured yet. We couldn't do that because we still needed to wrap it around. So I'm going to give this a good press, and we are then going to go on and just top stitch that front facing 2 centimeters off the edge. And it's such a clean finish, and look how straight down that looks. And that's it. We just need to top stitch now the front facing before we start doing something else, and then we can put our binding on. So let's move on to the next step.